Well, because we know how these things go. Just gonna start introducing it. That's right.
Ready.
All right. Well, good to teach everybody. Kaawootk. This is just been going so wonderfully. Really, really wonderfully. A lot of amazing ideas, and there's never enough time. That's it. Just to give us more to look forward to the next time. So, we had a really, really wonderful morning of stories and discussion on master Tlingit artists of the 20th century. And one thing I should note is ongoing research we're going to need to do, or stories that we're going to need to tell each other, is some of the master bead workers, some of the master weavers, and that's one reason why, I'm going to look forward to my lovely wife's presentation on weaving. But in any case, we're going to start with, in deference to just the time, the limited amount of time we have, we want to start right away and let people come in if they do. And we'll start with Steve Henrikson on his research on someone in his family, Rudolph Walton, Kaawootk, and Kaawootk, if I got that right, of the Kiks.adí. So, one in on top of that. Right.
This is the announcement.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much, Yesh, and I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference. Another great effort after years of work to pull this together, the funding and the organization. It's been going really well, and I'd like to thank Ish and the other organizing committee members for doing such a fine job, and Ish too for pulling together this wonderful session that we have today to try to learn more about the Tlingit artists of the 20th century. And the person I'll be talking about today, Rudolph Walton, is in my wife's family. And I don't consider this my story at all. I have put some effort into pulling all these loose ends together, working closely with the Walton family. Are there any Walton descendants in the room today? I'd like to thank them all for their wonderful contributions, and I'd also like to thank the researchers of the past, the curators and librarians who pulled all this information together. They knew it was important. They may not have accurately made sense of it all. They didn't have all the pieces. They just had a few individual pieces of the puzzle, and when you don't have a body of material, it's hard to really get it right. But I'm making use of all that effort that they went to in the past, and so I think they deserve a lot of credit. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh. Hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Oh, okay. So Rudolph Walton began his life in 1867 as Kaawootk, the Tlingit, the Kiks.adí clan of Sitka. These are some of the people I wanted to single out. There's many more, but these are primary people that contributed what they knew, and I really feel that was very generous on their part. They really cherished this information and saw that if everybody put the pieces that they know together, it could amount to something really important. So I'd like to thank all of them. As I said, 1867, the year Alaska was taken over by the Americans, was the year Rudolph Walton was born in Sitka in one of the Kiks.adí houses. And he actually was born on Bjorka Island, which today figures prominently in most people's weather reports because that's where the Doppler radar is for Southeast Alaska, and it was the traditional land of the Kiks.adí until World War II, when the whole island was commandeered for use during the war, and after the war it was never returned. It transferred from the Navy to other federal agencies. But that's where it all started for Rudolph Walton, and this is some of the members of his clan from the 1930s wearing their adu. So Rudolph Walton obtained the name Rudolph Walton after he was adopted by a Presbyterian minister in Philadelphia. He actually didn't adopt him. He offered to pay tuition for Kaawootk to go to the Sitka Industrial School. And in those days, if you made a contribution, they didn't give you a coffee mug. You got the honor of renaming the person that you were sending to school. And so that's how Rudolph Walton got his name, his English name. And one of Rudolph Walton from Philadelphia's best friends was named Wanamaker. And so that's where that name comes into play in Southeast Alaska. But in 1880 or so, Rudolph Walton and his father happened to be on a canoe trip with Sheldon Jackson, who came to Alaska for the first time, was taking a canoe from Metlakatla to Haines, and they rode along. And that was the first contact that they had with the Presbyterian missionary. Soon after that, Kaawoot's father was killed by a bear on Kruzof Island, and so his mother needed help, and so that's how he came to be one of the first students at the Sitka Industrial School. This is the earliest photo that we have him from around that time period. This is the school, of course, and eventually, after he graduated and was married, he took up residence in the district called New Westminster. It was what they called the model cottages, where the newly graduated students from the Presbyterian school were set up in their own houses in this protected little enclave away from the traditional influences that they would have had if they moved back into the village. So this was a group of houses that were specially built for the new families that came out of the school. This is Rudolph Walton's first family, Daisy, and some of his children from the first family about 1895 or so. Rudolph and his first and second wives had many children over the years, at least 10 or 12 that we know of, but it's really hard to keep track because there was a high infant mortality in those days, and they reused the names. If one child with the name Mary or James passed away, they would rename their next child that. So when you're looking at genealogical records, it becomes really confusing. But they have a lot of children, and were set up in the house on the right was Rudolph Walton's house where he had his family, and there are one or two of those houses that are still standing in Sitka today, mostly heavily remodeled, but they have been around for a long time, and I know exactly where those rocks are too. Those are still there on the street. But just to the down the hill from Rudolph Walton's house was the beach where they brought canoes up. You can actually see a couple canoes over here, and this was his first artist studio. He decided to become an artist sometime in the late 1880s, early 1890s, after he moved to Juneau for a brief time and was a miner here, but he really missed his family, and he decided to take up artwork as a way to stay at home and to be with his family. And in those days, of course, between the breakdown of the master-apprentice system of learning and also the vacuuming up of huge amounts of artwork from Sitka, between the two, it was difficult to become a self-taught artist in those days. There's neither the educational system that you would normally turn to for that purpose, and there wasn't a lot of artwork around to be teachers, so for the artists. So they really had a difficult time of it, that first generation of artists who had to figure it out on their own. And that's one of the remarkable things about what they did, I think, is that they didn't have a lot of resources available, but they managed to pull it together. And they were, even though Kaawootk went through the missionary school, his son Jim Walton told me that the Klan had decided long before that they would send certain children to the school to learn the ways of the Presbyterians and Americans. They knew that their survival was going to count on being able to understand that system and eventually possibly use their knowledge to better their own positions in the American society. And Rudolph was one of those students that was selected to go through the full all the grades of school, and sometime in that period, either on his own or possibly by taking a class in art at the school. It's one of the many contradictions of the time that the Sitka school actually, on one hand, they were telling students not to speak their traditional language, not to participate in native customs at all, but they held classes in native art. But I think they saw it more as a vocational activity to generate curios for the tourist market, rather than something that they would actually apply to traditional culture. This is the beach right near his house, so that gives you an idea of where it is in Sitka. That's right now on the road as you go approach the National Historical Park. So after graduation, Rudolph started doing art. He also, well before 1912 and the founding of the Alaska Native Brotherhood, he and other Klan leaders were very active in asserting their rights, and their letters to the District of Alaska governor, where they petitioned him to, for instance, protect their fishing rights. Those are in the state archives now. So, well before the Alaska Native Brotherhood started up, even though that was very early, they were already doing a lot on their own, what they could to use the ways of the Americans to protect themselves and their families. Another contradiction, of course, is that while the Presbyterians and government did what they could to suppress native culture persisted, and they were faced with trying to enforce what rules they had that were designed to crush native culture. Rudolph Walton was one of the upper echelon of the Kiks.adí. He was called upon to participate in ceremonies, even if he was taught that was not right. He still felt obligated to do it because that was his culture. He became a Kaawootk for a peace ceremony that took place over the frog crest. And once word of that leaked out to the Presbyterians, they weren't very happy about it, and he was, I don't know what the official term for his punishment was, but I think it was something like a temporary excommunication. He left town for a few weeks and eventually came back and continued to serve as an elder in the Tlingit Presbyterian Church. But those things were happening at the time. Here's a very rare photo of a peace dance. I'm not sure if it was over the frog or some other occasion, but Rudolph also produced art for traditional purposes, like the bear hat on the worn by the man on the right. I'm not sure who that is, but it's a Kaawootk hat. And this is one of his more famous carvings, a pair of house posts for the 1904 potlatch sponsored by the Gooch Hit of the Kaawootk in Sitka. And this particular pair of house posts now in the Alaska State Museum caused Rudolph a lot of trouble because of that and some other information that came out. His kids were denied enrollment in the U.S. public school in Sitka. The law at the time said that if your children were of mixed blood, native and non-native, and they were leading a civilized life, they wouldn't be relegated to going to native school, which wasn't as nice and didn't get as much funding as the public school. They were eligible to go to public school, but it all hinged on whether they could prove they were civilized. And Rudolph Walton's stepchildren went to school and they were denied access, and he actually sued the Sitka school board over this, and they had a trial that very much hinged on whether Rudolph Walton was leading a civilized life. One of the some of the evidence that the Sitka school board brought up was that Rudolph made these house posts for the 1904 potlatch. And in spite of testimony about how much of an upstanding citizen he was from people like the governor of Alaska, he was found to be not civilized, and the kids were denied access, and he also had to pay the legal fees of the Sitka school board for having the audacity to challenge their decision. So with so many things like this, there's layers of meaning here that I think are quite interesting. The original meaning, of course, a Kaawootk crest, the wolf that was ceremonially installed in one of the wolf houses at that Kaawootk, but also the legal history of this object that really says a lot about the time and place that it was created. This photograph was also used as evidence in the trial because these were Rudolph's stepchildren. Their father, who was then deceased, is right here in the photo, and that was also brought up as well. You know, the father of these children, and here is a picture of him at a Kaawootk, so obviously not civilized. As far as Rudolph's artistic career, he was throughout this period. One of his first jobs that we know of was being hired to refurbish the totem poles that were sent to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. When they came back from that, they needed to be cleaned up and repaired and repainted, and he was part of the crew that worked on that, and ultimately those poles were put back into the totem park in Sitka. He established an art gallery and store on Lincoln Street, very close to the steamship dock. This is his store. It says Walton and Son, maker of native jewelry. And as an artist, he may have been unique in Sitka in having his own actual store operation there that sold not only artwork, his artwork, but other people's artwork, and also general merchandise too. This was the first shop. Well, I think the shop that he had next to his house was probably allowed tourists to come into that one too. But this was another version of his store, and then this is an advertisement that came out at the time advertising his business and some of the things that he sold, many of which were his own creations that he made during the off-season when he was trapping or out fishing and they were stuck because of bad weather in a sealing camp or something. He was making these things and taking them back to Sitka and building up his stock during the off-season. So it was very much, the production of art was very much incorporated into the annual production of food and goods for subsistence purposes. It just intermeshed with that. This was another one of his houses and stores. It says Curio Store there on the side. This is also right next to the steamship dock on Catley Street. His son Jim said that they brought merchandise into the store by boat. The boat pulled up underneath the house and they had a trap door in the floor and they raised all the merchandise up into the house. And it must have been pretty tight quarters because the store occupied the first floor, so the family was living up here, and it was a very large family. And Rudolph needed a place to work, so he carved out a little shop right in the corner of that upper floor, and that's the window that he put in right over his bench, so he'd have a little bit of light. And this is the front of that building. Dick Wood of Juneau found this photo on eBay, of all places, and actually we get a lot of great information from eBay. But this was a magic lantern slide that he then scanned, and we couldn't quite get enough detail to look at what might have been on display in the front windows, but there is a model paddle and some other items here on the deck to demonstrate something of what was being sold on the inside. There's a steamship too right in the back there. So this was like ground zero of South Franklin Street in Sitka terms at those days. It was a very good location to be selling to tourists. But even though the items that he made may have been designed in many cases for consumption by non-natives, by tourists, the same art was bought and used by the people themselves, and they cherished this as their traditional art. And there's really no distinction in my mind between the two. Later they opened a restaurant there called the Rainbow Room. This is a little building they added on as a little restaurant, and so there are some people still around that used to eat there. So we don't have any photos of what the inside of Rudolph's studio looked like, but probably something like this. Yethna Wu's shop in Sitka is doing some soldering there, it looks like. This is a set of tools at the American Museum of Natural History collected by George Emmons that would have given you some idea of the kinds of tools that they were using. They made a lot of their own tools, and they used different bits of metal, different kinds of wood that were a lot of times salvaged off of other artifacts, other tools, and they custom made their own set of tools. And we have a really good idea of the amount of production and work that Rudolph did over the years, because in his diary that he kept pretty meticulously for 50 years or so, it usually talks about what he was doing on a given day, like a clock repair. I had been working on an ivory tusk, and he used a walrus tusk to make model totem poles. So you can get a sense of what he was working on and how long it might take to work on a given object. And there are some sketchbooks around too that have really helped us out with identifying his work. These are actually some drawings that he made for George Emmons to depict different details of different designs that Emmons was trying to figure out what was going on with the form line system, and he wanted Rudolph to just talk about some of the components of the art. When we look at it today, thanks to Bill Holm and others who have analyzed the form, we can see that a big design is made up of individual components. And Emmons obviously was kind of interested in those components and had Rudolph drawing some of the details from various designs and identifying them. This is a pattern book that he may have, and these have drawings and prices on them. These may have been just on the counter in his store, and people, if they wanted a custom order, they could go through and order one of the spoon designs, and then he would produce them as quickly as possible and send them later if he wasn't able to produce them in time. This is pretty typical of what one of the spoons is like. Ish, if you could let me know when I have 5 minutes to go.
Okay, yeah, it's probably about,
Okay.
right now, just a couple minutes.
Okay, so this is a pretty typical spoon design, although he did many variations of these, and there must be thousands of these in existence. We found them in so many, dozens of museum collections around the world. They're just all over the place. He was incredibly productive. The one on the left is especially unusual because he signed it Octoxine, and he very rarely signed his name to any of these, but his style and sometimes he engraved Sitka on things or put the date on them. It's very distinctive. So even though those aren't really signatures, they're as if they were because they're diagnostic. A wide range of different kinds of silver forms, serving sets. This is a cribbage board. A lot of these things are being sent to the Sheldon Jackson Museum, who have built up a remarkably full collection of his work over the years, because people see that as a place to accumulate it, and they really got some remarkable things like the cribbage board here, one of his ivory totem poles with silver caps. He's known for his bracelets. Here's a gold bracelet that was in a Sitka family's collection. Napkin rings. These are the two sides of the same napkin ring. This is his own snuff box, a silver snuff box with his own crest, the frog and raven, in a watch case that he engraved. So as we go to museums all over the place, we're always on the lookout for this. This was a ladle that he made that's in the Anchorage Museum. It has some of the same characteristics we see on the silver, including some actual silver pieces, embellishments that are put on the ladle. Here's a sheephorn ladle in the American Museum of Natural History that I think is probably his work, just based on the style of the ovoids and other details. Rudolph Walton and other artists in Sitka are credited with developing this type of bowl that people have called Sitka-style bowls, and sometimes Augustus Bean, a Kaawootk artist, is also given credit for developing these. And many of them are stained very dark with shoe polish probably, and it's as if they were trying to resemble argillite carvings. But these are all carved out of wood, and we have at least 4 or 5 of them that are in the family's collection or that have some positive identification as being his work as part of the provenance. And those are incredibly important pieces, because from those we learn what the style is, and then we can attribute other pieces to these artists who rarely sign their names to things. So a seal bowl, this one has 2 bears clinging onto the rim. This is one of his more unique contributions, is this style of carving. This one shows it a little bit better. The engraving on the side is really an innovation. That's the interesting thing about this time period in art history, where the rules of the 19th century are breaking up, and which, because in that process much of the composition of the form line designs and the balance of positive and negative space is lost, and we mourn that loss, because that was important and significant. But that loss ushered in new ways of doing things, new innovations that artists felt freer to engage in, like what we see here. And I think that's part of the history. These pieces all tell the story of the time they were created in. And it's neither good nor bad. It's the way it is. History is embedded in things like this. So just briefly running through a few other things, the model paddles. Here's Rudolph in his older age. He worked, we know for sure his first spoon is dated 1892, and he worked up until his death in 1951. So almost 60 years of artistic creation. He was also a boat builder and carpenter. This is in his later years. I also wanted to end by giving credit to a good friend of Rudolph Walton's, the missionary school doctor in Sitka, Bertrand Wilbur, who became close friends with Rudolph, was adopted by him. Dr. Wilbur saved Rudolph's life once, and the families stayed close for many, many years, and much of what we know about Rudolph Walton's style comes from Dr. Wilbur's collection of Rudolph's art. This is his house in Sitka with his giant collection of curios, not all by Rudolph Walton, but some of those are. And eventually, Dr. Wilbur left Sitka to take over the family chocolate business in Pennsylvania. These are the Wilbur Buds, which, according to the Wilburs, Hershey's copied these to make the Kisses, which are inferior. But they are nice if they're wrapped in foil. The Wilbur Buds weren't. But we owe a big debt of gratitude to the Wilbur family for sharing what they know, and also again it points to this. The contradictions of the time are many, and it makes it difficult for us to generalize about what was going on, what people were thinking at the time, because Dr. Wilbur, here he was, a staunch Presbyterian sent to the Sitka Mission to supposedly treat the students at the school, and he started seeing that there was a greater need in the community and started treating people whether they were going to the school or not. He went down to the Sitka Indian village to treat people there, and his superiors, they didn't like that at all. They reprimanded him, but he kept doing it. And this is a beaded shirt that was given to Dr. Wilbur for his 1-year-old son, Bert, who was born in Sitka in 1899. This is Bert about 10 years ago when he was about to turn 101 with the same shirt. And so we're really indebted to the Wilburs for bringing a lot of this history back. And a few years ago, there was a reunion between the Waltons and the Wilburs where both sides shared a lot of information that neither side remembered, and the relationship was brought up again. So I think my time is up, so thank you very much.